The late afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains, bathing the kitchen in a tired golden hue. I had just finished washing the last of the dishes when I heard it a whisper, soft but sharp enough to pierce through the hum of the old refrigerator. Her time here is almost over. The voice belonged to Maya, my daughter-in-law. It came from just behind the kitchen door, followed by another, lower one, her friend, Sana. My hands froze midair, droplets of water clinging to my knuckles. The plate nearly slipped from my grasp. For a moment, I thought I misheard. I wanted to believe they were talking about something else, maybe a television character, maybe a neighbor. But then Maya's next words made my heart sink. I just need a few more days, Sana. Then she'll be gone, and I'll finally have peace in this house. Gone. That word echoed inside me like a knock in an empty hallway. I stood there, hidden by the thin wall separating the kitchen from the hallway, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. The air suddenly felt heavier, as though the entire house had stopped listening to the usual clatter of cups and the faint laughter of children, and was now eavesdropping with me. Gone. Me. I was the she. My name is Evelina, though everyone calls me Nanny, even the neighbors. For the past year, I've been living with my son, Ryan, and his wife, Maya, after my health began to falter. My joints had grown stiff, my eyesight dimmer, and my independence, once my proudest treasure, had quietly slipped away. When I moved in, Ryan promised, "You'll always have a place here, Ma." But promises spoken in kindness often wilt when life gets busy. Over the months, I began to notice the small changes, the ones that seem harmless until they begin to stack up. My favorite chair was moved to a corner to make space. My teacup was replaced with a sturdier one, so it won't slip. My stories at dinner went unheard, replaced by the tap-tap of phones and the distant buzz of modern life. I told myself Maya was simply tired, that caring for me wasn't easy. After all, she worked long hours, raised 2 little boys, and managed the household. I wanted to be grateful. I was grateful. But gratitude is heavy when you have nowhere else to go. And now, behind the kitchen door, I heard her say that my time here was almost over. A chill crept up my spine. I pressed my palm against the counter for balance, the veins in my hand trembling slightly. Sana sighed on the other side. "Are you sure, Maya? She's his mother. Ryan will never forgive you." Maya's reply came cold and low, like the sound of a door closing softly. "He'll understand once he sees how she's changed this house. The boys barely have space to play, and she keeps talking about turning the guest room into a prayer corner. I can't live like this. Not anymore." My throat tightened. That guest room, it was where I kept the few things that reminded me of my late husband, his prayer beads, his books, a faded photo of him in his uniform. I had thought it brought warmth to the house. To her, it brought inconvenience. Their voices faded as they walked away, leaving silence behind a silence that throbbed in my chest. I leaned against the wall, trying to gather my thoughts. My knees ached, and for the first time in a long while, the house that once felt like a refuge now felt like a stranger's home. Dinner that night was quiet. Maya moved around the kitchen gracefully, but her eyes avoided mine. She spoke only to the children, Aram and Isa, her tone sweet and calm, as if nothing had happened. "Eat your vegetables, Isa. Grandma needs strong boys like you," she said, glancing briefly in my direction. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Ryan sat across from me, distracted by his phone. He didn't notice the tension sitting between his wife and me like a third shadow at the table. I wanted to speak, to ask, to confront, to understand, but my courage wavered. I've lived long enough to know that words spoken in anger can scar deeper than silence. So I kept quiet, folding my sorrow neatly beneath my breath. After dinner, I went to my small room at the end of the hallway. The walls were lined with framed memories: my son's graduation, our family trips, my husband's laughter frozen in time. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching a shawl that smelled faintly of sandalwood and rain. My heart felt too full, like it couldn't contain all the unspoken years, all the moments of sacrifice that no one seemed to remember anymore. I looked at the small window beside the bed. Outside, the world continued, neighbors chatting, the distant sound of a motorbike, a lullaby playing from another house. Life moved on, indifferent to mine. I thought of leaving, of packing my few belongings and walking out quietly, sparing Maya the burden she clearly felt I had become. But where would I go? The home my husband and I built had been sold to pay for Ryan's education. My brother lived miles away, his own family barely managing. No, this was my only place to be. Yet, the words, "Her time here is almost over," echoed again, each syllable clawing at the edges of my peace. Was Maya planning to send me to an old-age home? Or perhaps convince Ryan to move me somewhere temporary? I tried to sleep that night, but the darkness hummed with unease. Every creak of the house sounded like a warning. And beneath it all, I kept hearing that whisper, soft, sharp, certain. Her time here is almost over. But little did Maya know, time has a way of turning whispers into truths, and truths into reckonings. The morning after that whisper, the sun rose pale and hesitant, as if it too was unsure about shining on this house. I sat on the porch with a cup of weak tea, the warmth doing little to chase away the cold inside me. I could hear Maya in the kitchen, her voice crisp as she gave instructions to Aram and Isa. "Put on your sweaters before school. It's chilly." Her tone was motherly, efficient, almost rehearsed. She didn't sound like the woman I overheard last night, but maybe she never did. Not when others were listening. Ryan joined me outside a few minutes later, his tie slightly crooked, his phone in hand as always. "Morning, Ma," he said, planting a quick kiss on my forehead. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep much," I replied softly. I wanted to tell him. Every part of me wanted to spill what I'd heard, to make him understand that the home I had once been invited into was slowly rejecting me. But as I looked at his face, tired, kind, but distant, the words dissolved in my throat. He was juggling too much already. Work, fatherhood, bills. He didn't need my worries added to the pile. Instead, I smiled. Just wanted to watch the sun come up. He nodded absently, scrolling through messages. "Good idea. You'll feel better with fresh air." Then he left, the sound of his car fading down the street, leaving behind a silence that settled over the house like dust. Later that day, I decided to busy myself with small chores, dusting, folding laundry, tending to the little potted plants by the window. They were wilting, much like my spirit. I whispered to them, "You mustn't give up just because the light is fading." I smiled bitterly at the irony. Around noon, I heard footsteps behind me. Maya. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "Evelina," she began, using my full name instead of Ma. That was new. "I need to talk to you about something." My chest tightened. "Of course." She gestured toward the kitchen table. "Please sit." I obeyed, though my heart pounded like a drum. "I've been thinking," she said, sitting across from me. "You've been here for almost a year now, and I know it hasn't been easy for you. For any of us." I nodded slowly, unsure where this was leading. "I just feel," she continued, choosing her words carefully, "that maybe you'd be more comfortable somewhere with people your age. You know, where you'd have company, activities, care around the clock." Her voice was calm, practiced, and wrapped in politeness, the kind that hides cruelty beneath the folds of courtesy. "I blinkse her." "You mean a home?" She smiled faintly. "An assisted living center, yes. There's a really good one near the park. I even visited last week. They have a garden, a prayer hall, everything you'd like." The air thickened. My fingers trembled slightly on the table. "You visited?" She hesitated. "Yes. I just wanted to be prepared in case you wanted to consider it." In case I wanted to consider it. The words stung because they weren't mine to begin with. I wanted to ask her what made her think I was unhappy here. I wanted to ask if I had done something wrong. But instead I said quietly, "And Ryan? Does he know?" She lowered her gaze briefly. "Not yet. I'll talk to him when the time is right. You know how emotional he gets." I let out a brittle laugh. "Yes, he's his father's son." Her face softened slightly, perhaps catching a flicker of guilt. "Evelina, please don't take this the wrong way. I just think you deserve comfort, care, peace." Peace. The word sat heavy between us. I wanted to scream that peace was never found in loneliness, that care without love was hollow, that the sound of a grandchild's laughter meant more to me than any tidy facility ever could. But my voice wouldn't rise. Years of learning patience, of being the quiet one, the understanding mother, had trained me too well. "I'll think about it," I whispered. Her shoulders eased, relief flickering across her face. "That's all I ask." She stood, leaving the table, her heels clicking down the hall. The faint scent of her perfume lingered long after she left, sweet, floral, suffocating. When she was gone, I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty chair she just vacated. My mind raced through memories of when Ryan first brought her home as his bride, her shy smile, the henna still fresh on her hands. She had been gentle then, warm. What had changed? Maybe the years had hardened her. Or maybe I had simply outstayed my welcome. That evening, I found myself sitting beside the boys as they played with their toy cars. Aram, the older one, was building a track out of cardboard boxes, while Isa, the younger, clutched his favorite blue car. "Grandma, look! Isa squalet! My car can fly!" He launched it off the couch, and it landed squarely in my lap. I laughed a small, unguarded sound. It did fly, my love. Maya looked up from the kitchen, watching us. For a brief second, I thought I saw something flicker in her expression, maybe remorse, maybe fatigue. Then she turned away, rinsing a dish. I picked up the toy and handed it back to Isa, brushing his curls out of his eyes. "Never stop believing things can fly, huh?" He grinned. "Like you, Grandma." The question caught me off guard. "Me?" "Yeah," he said innocently. "Mama said one day you'll go live somewhere nice and quiet, where angels sing." "That's flying, right?" My smile faltered. My throat closed around his words. So she'd already planted the seed. I forced a gentle laugh, though it cracked slightly. "Yes, maybe one day. But not yet, my dear." He nodded, content, and went back to his toys. I turned my gaze toward Maya again, who was now busy setting the table. Our eyes met for just a heartbeat. Hers darted away first. That night, as I lay in bed, the house seemed smaller, the walls closing in just a little more. My husband's photo on the nightstand watched silently, as if he too couldn't believe what had become of our home. I whispered into the darkness, "They're sending me away, love. But maybe it's time I remind them roots don't leave the soil so easily." The clock ticked on, steady and cold, while the whisper from behind the kitchen door replayed once more in my mind, now no longer a threat but a promise I intended to confront. The next few days moved in uneasy quiet, like a calm before an inevitable storm. I went about my routines, preparing my tea, tending to my plants, and pretending not to hear the faint phone calls Maya made in the evenings. I could tell she was planning something, though she was careful to whisper when she spoke. One afternoon, I caught her in the living room, laptop open, her tone brisk. "Yes, I understand. Yes, she can manage short walks, but not stairs. She prefers vegetarian meals." I froze in the hallway. She wasn't even hiding it anymore. When she ended the call, I quietly turned away before she could notice me. The house suddenly felt like it had walls made of glass, fragile, transparent, and too revealing. I no longer felt safe, even in my silence. That night, when Ryan came home, I watched her greet him with the same sweet smile she'd worn since their wedding day. "Dinner's ready, love," she said, placing her hand gently on his shoulder. He smiled, tired and trusting as always. She knew how to wrap her words in warmth. She always had. During dinner, I could feel my heartbeat louder than the clinking of spoons. I looked at my son, wondering when would be the right time to tell him. Would he even believe me? Or would Maya's calm voice overpower mine as it always did? The boys chattered between bites, completely unaware of the storm brewing just beneath their grandmother's calm smile. "Grandma," said Aram suddenly, "can you come to school for Grandparents' Day next week?" My heart softened. "Of course, my dear. I wouldn't miss it." Maya's spoon paused midair. "We'll see," she said lightly. "Let's talk about it later." Aram frowned. "But Mama, you said Grandma could come this time." Maya gave him a quick look, the kind that ended all questions. "Eat your food, Aram." He went quiet, and so did I. After dinner, I lingered in the kitchen as Maya washed the dishes. The air smelled of soap and tension. I stepped forward slowly, my voice steady but low. "Maya," I began, "I know what you're planning." Her hand stilled in the water, but she didn't look at me. "I don't know what you mean." I took a breath. "The calls. The center. You don't have to hide it anymore." She turned then, drying her hands on a towel, her face calm but her eyes sharp. "Evelina, please. This isn't personal. You need better care. I can't give you what you deserve." "I didn't ask for care," I replied softly. I asked for family. She sighed, exasperated. You make it sound so simple. But it's not. You don't understand how hard it's been for me juggling work, the kids, the house. And me. I finished for her. Yes, she said finally, her voice cracking slightly. You too. We stood there in silence, two women bound by love to the same man, both trying to survive under one roof. Maya, I whispered, you may not see it now, but one day you'll stand where I am. And when you do, I hope the person looking back at you doesn't whisper that your time is over. She blinked, her composure faltering just for a second before she turned away. I'll talk to Ryan soon, she murmured and left the room. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by my window, looking at the streetlights flickering like tired stars. The world outside seemed peaceful, almost mocking my unrest. I thought of my husband again, Farid, with his patient eyes and steady hands. I wished he were here. He would have known what to do. He always did. Farid, I whispered into the night, they think I'm a burden. But I promised you I'd never lose my dignity. The room felt colder than usual. I pulled my shawl tighter and reached for the small wooden box on my nightstand, the one where I kept all my old letters and photographs. Among them was one I hadn't read in years, a letter from Farid before he passed, written in his familiar slanting handwriting. It said, "If life ever turns cold, remember, you built warmth into others. That cannot be taken from you." Tears blurred the ink as I read those words again. I stayed up till dawn, deciding something I hadn't dared to before. If Maya wanted me gone, I wouldn't go quietly. Not out of anger, but out of love for the truth. The next day, I dressed early. When Ryan came downstairs, I was waiting with his breakfast and a steady gaze. "Ryan," I said gently, "can we talk?" He looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, Ma. What's wrong?" Maya froze mid-step in the hallway. I knew she was listening. "I just wanted to ask," I continued calmly, "did you know your wife visited an assisted living center last week?" His fork clattered onto the plate. "What?" Maya stepped into the room quickly. "Evelina." "No, let her finish," Ryan interrupted, his voice low. I kept my tone soft, my hands folded neatly on the table. "She said it might be better for me to move there. Somewhere with people my age, as she put it." Ryan turned to Maya, confusion and hurt flickering across his face. "Is that true?" She hesitated. "I was just exploring options. I didn't decide anything. You're never home, Ryan. You don't see how hard it's been. She's lonely. I thought maybe." "Without asking me," he snapped, his calm cracking. I closed my eyes, not to block the sight of them arguing, but to hold back the ache in my chest. I never wanted to be the reason for discord, but truth has a way of showing its face, even when it hurts. Finally, he sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Enough. No one's going anywhere." Maya's lips pressed tight, but she said nothing more. I rose quietly from my chair, leaving them both in silence. I didn't feel triumphant, only tired. Later that evening, Ryan came to my room. His expression was softer now. "Ma, I'm Soda." I didn't know. I should have been paying more attention. I smiled faintly. "You've done enough, my son. Just keep your home warm. That's all I ask." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "Always." When he left, I looked once more at the family photo on my table. For the first time in weeks, I felt something shift, not peace. Not yet, but perhaps the beginning of it. Still, I knew Maya wasn't done. The storm hadn't passed, it had only changed direction. And I was ready for whatever came next. The days that followed felt strangely quiet, too quiet, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you second-guess the calm. After that morning's confrontation, Maya moved around the house like a shadow, polite, reserved but distant. She spoke less, smiled less, and the warmth in her voice when she said, "Ma," was gone entirely. Now it was always "Evelina," clipped and formal, as if she were addressing a stranger renting a corner of her home. I didn't blame her. Truth has a way of leaving cracks in places where comfort once lived. But as each day passed, the air in the house grew heavier and I could feel the ground shifting beneath all of us. One morning, I caught her standing in the kitchen, staring blankly out the window. Her coffee sat untouched on the counter, steam curling up into nothing. "Maya," I said softly. She startled slightly, then turned toward me, forcing a tight smile. "Good morning." Good morning, I replied, pouring myself tea. The boys left for school? Yes. Ryan dropped them off early. She hesitated before adding, He's been quiet since that morning. I nodded, stirring my cup gently. He just needs time. Her expression softened, but only for a moment. I didn't mean for things to turn out this way, Evelina. I just wanted peace. I wanted to feel like this house was mine again. I looked at her, really looked at the dark circles beneath her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped, the exhaustion hidden behind her calm. It struck me, then, that maybe, beneath all the tension, there was another kind of sorrow, the kind that comes when love and duty collide. Maya, I said quietly, peace doesn't come from moving people away. It comes from letting them in. She didn't respond, just stared into her coffee as if trying to find an answer in its swirling surface. Then, without another word, she turned and left the room. Later that afternoon, I decided to make something I hadn't in a long time, halwa, the way my mother used to make it. The smell of roasted semolina and butter began to fill the house, weaving its way through the silence. For the first time in days, I felt a small flicker of warmth. When the boys came home from school, their eyes lit up. Grandma made halwa, Aram shouted, running to the kitchen. Maya appeared in the doorway, arms crossed but visibly torn between annoyance and nostalgia. It smells good, she said softly. I smiled. It's your husband's favorite too. For a brief moment, something shifted. Her lips curved into the faintest, almost reluctant smile. She didn't say anything more, but she didn't leave either. She stayed, leaning against the counter while the boys devoured spoonfuls of sweetness, their laughter bouncing off the walls. That sound, their laughter, it melted something in me. I looked at them and thought, maybe this is what keeps us here, not obligation, not guilt, but small moments like this that remind us why we stay. Later that night, as I cleaned the kitchen, I noticed Maya quietly washing the last few dishes. You made them very happy today, she said without looking at me. I'm glad, I replied softly. Then, after a long pause, she added, I did visit that center again. I stopped drying my hands. Oh, but not to register you, she continued. I went to volunteer. Her voice was quiet, almost fragile. There were so many people there, people no one visits anymore. It made me realize maybe I was wrong about what you needed. I turned slowly, my heart tightening. And what do you think I need now? She looked at me then, her eyes glistening under the kitchen light. Not a place to go, just a place to belong. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The kitchen, which had once been the place of whispers and resentment, now felt different. I stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her arm. We both need that, Maya. We both do. Her lips trembled slightly, and she nodded. I'm sorry, she whispered. I smiled faintly. So am I. The next morning, Ryan joined us for breakfast. It was the first time in weeks all of us sat together, no unspoken tension, no careful silence. The boys talked about school, Maya served tea, and for once, the table felt whole again. Halfway through the meal, Ryan looked at me. Ma, Aram told me you're coming to his school next week. He's really excited. I chuckled. I wouldn't miss it. Maya smiled slightly. I'll help you pick an outfit. That small gesture, simple, almost ordinary, filled the room with a quiet warmth I hadn't felt in months. Later that afternoon, I was sitting in the garden, trimming the leaves of my favorite jasmine plant, when Maya came outside carrying a small basket. Inside it were my old prayer beads, a photograph of Farid, and a small framed picture of me with Ryan as a child. I found these in the guest room, she said. I thought you might want them closer. I looked at her, unsure if my voice would hold steady. Thank you. She sat beside me on the bench, her fingers brushing over the photograph. He looks just like you, she murmured. Except for the patience, I teased softly. She laughed, a real, unguarded laugh. The sound felt like forgiveness taking its first breath. We sat there for a while, surrounded by the smell of blooming jasmine and the hum of distant life. The wind carried the sound of the children playing inside, their laughter warm and free. I don't know if I can make things right all at once, she said after a while, but I want to try. I nodded, my eyes glistening with quiet gratitude. That's all love ever asks for. The sun began to dip, painting the sky in soft orange and pink. I leaned back against the bench, feeling the peace I thought I'd lost slowly finding its way home. Maya sighed gently beside me. "You know," she said, glancing toward the kitchen window, "it was behind that door I said the worst thing I've ever said." I smiled faintly, the breeze lifting my hair. "And right here," I whispered, "you took it back." The following week began with laughter, sunlight, and the faint scent of jasmine seeping through the curtains, a reminder that peace, once lost, could still return if you tended to it carefully. I woke early that Monday, moving slower than I used to but with purpose. The house no longer felt like a battlefield. The quiet between Maya and me wasn't heavy anymore. It was gentle, almost thoughtful. I heard the boys in the hallway, Aram and Ayase, arguing over whose turn it was to feed the cat. "You did it yesterday," Ayase protested, his small voice echoing down the corridor. Maya's voice followed, light but firm. "Both of you, please. Share. Grandma's still sleeping." I smiled to myself. There was no sharpness in her tone, no bitterness hiding behind her words. Just the sound of a mother being a mother. When I came out, Maya looked up from packing their lunches. "Morning," she said. "Morning," I replied, taking a seat by the table. She handed me a cup of tea before I could even ask. The gesture was small, but it spoke volumes. "Aram tells me Grandparents' Day is on Friday," she said as she adjusted Ayase's collar. "Yes," I said. "He wants me to read a story for the class." Maya chuckled. "That sounds perfect for you." Her laughter was lighter now, her eyes softer. The walls between us weren't gone, not yet, but they were no longer towering. They were becoming doors, and both of us, in our own quiet ways, were learning to knock before entering each other's space. That afternoon, while she was at work and the house was quiet again, I sat in my room sorting through old letters and photographs. I found one from Ryan's childhood, a crayon drawing he'd made of our family. 3 stick figures, smiling under a lopsided sun. In one corner, he'd drawn a small flower and labeled it Mama's Garden. The edges of the paper had yellowed, but the drawing still made me smile. I wondered what my son would say if he knew how close we'd come to breaking that family circle and how, somehow, we were finding our way back into it. I was lost in thought when I heard a soft knock on the door. It was Ryan, still in his office clothes, his tie slightly loosened. "Ay, Ma." "Ryan, you're home early." He smiled, stepping in. "Yeah, Maya told me you and she have been talking." I hesitated. "We've been trying," I said. He nodded, his expression filled with something between relief and guilt. "I should have seen it earlier, Ma. I've been too wrapped up in work. You've always been the heart of this home, and I let it turn cold." I reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. "You didn't let it, Beta. Life just gets loud sometimes. But you listened when it mattered." He smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "I love you, Ma." "I know," I whispered. "And I love her too, Ryan. She's learning, just like I am." He nodded again, his voice softer now. "You're both strong women. That's why I'm lucky even if you don't always see it." Friday arrived like a breath of new air. I wore my best pale blue shawl, the one Farid had gifted me on our last anniversary, and pinned a small silver brooch to it. Maya helped me adjust it before we left, her fingers careful, her expression warm. "You look beautiful," she said softly. "So do you," I replied, and she did not because of her clothes, but because her eyes carried something I hadn't seen in a long time: peace. At the school, the classroom buzzed with laughter and excitement. Grandparents were everywhere, silver hair, canes, soft voices, and gentle smiles. Aram waved when he saw me. "Grandma, over here." Maya stood beside him, beaming. "Go on," she whispered. "They've been waiting." When I took my place in front of the children, the teacher handed me a small book. But I didn't open it. Instead, I told them a story from memory, a story about a house that forgot how to love until one day the people inside remembered why they built it. The children listened, wide-eyed, and when I finished, the room was filled with small claps and innocent laughter. I glanced at Maya and saw her smiling, truly smiling, not the forced one she wore out of duty, but the kind that comes from understanding. After the event, as we walked to the car, she said quietly, "That story was about us, wasn't it?" He smiled, glancing ahead. "Maybe it was. Or maybe it was about every home that forgets, for a little while, how to hold its heart." That evening, the house glowed with the smell of dinner lentils, rice, and the faint sweetness of dessert cooling on the counter. The boys set the table, while Ryan helped pour water into the glasses. I watched them, the soft golden light flickering over their faces, and felt something inside me ease completely. When we sat down to eat, Maya raised her glass of water and said, "To new beginnings." Ryan smiled. "To family." The boys cheered, clinking their glasses of milk against ours. I looked around the table at the faces I'd once thought I might never sit beside again and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. For forgiveness, for second chances, for love that bends but doesn't break. As the evening drifted on, the kitchen door creaked slightly, that same door behind which I'd once heard the whisper that shattered my heart. Her time here is almost over. But tonight, that same space hummed with laughter, warmth, and the scent of life returning. And I realized maybe my time here wasn't over at all. Maybe, just maybe, it was only beginning again. Later that night, as I stood by the window, the stars hung bright over the city. Maya joined me quietly, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. "Evelina," she said softly, "I was thinking, would you like to start a small garden together in the backyard? The boys could help." I turned to her, smiling. "I'd love that." She nodded, eyes glimmering. "Then it's settled. Tomorrow we start fresh." We stood there in silence. Two women who had once stood on opposite sides of a door now standing side by side, no walls left between us. And in that silence, filled with forgiveness and jasmine-scented air, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Home. The next morning was brighter than usual, sunlight spilling through the curtains, casting golden shapes across the floor. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel heavy. It felt alive. I could hear Maya humming in the kitchen, something soft and familiar, maybe an old tune from her childhood. The scent of cardamom drifted through the air, blending with the sound of Aram and Ayase chasing each other down the hallway. Their laughter echoed like music, and I found myself smiling before I even realized it. When I stepped into the kitchen, Maya turned, a faint smear of flour on her cheek. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. "I made parathas, and I didn't burn them this time." I really laughed. "I'll believe that when I taste them." She grinned and handed me one, golden and crisp. It was perfect. I took a bite, pretending to think critically. Maybe I've taught you too well." Her eyes sparkled. "Or maybe I'm finally listening." That small exchange, simple, human, kind, was everything we'd been missing. After breakfast, Maya and I went to the backyard, carrying small pots, packets of seeds, and a few gardening tools. The sun was warm, the soil rich and damp beneath our hands. Aram and Ayase followed, armed with tiny watering cans that dripped more than they poured. "Okay," Maya said, kneeling beside me. "You're the expert. Where do we start?" I smiled, feeling a quiet joy stir within me. "We start with patience. Gardens don't grow from seeds alone, they grow from care." The boys giggled as they dug uneven holes in the earth. Maya and I planted jasmine, basil, and a few marigold, simple things, but each one chosen with meaning. When the last seed was covered, Maya brushed the dirt from her hands. "It feels peaceful," she said softly. "It is," I replied. "The earth listens, even when people don't." She looked at me, eyes glistening in the sunlight. "You've always been patient with me. I didn't deserve that." I shook my head gently. "We all stumble, Maya. But what matters is how we rise again. You chose to understand. That's more than most do." Her lips trembled into a small, grateful smile. "Thank you." I nodded, resting my hand over hers. "No need for thanks, dear. This home is big enough for both our hearts." Days began to pass in soft, golden rhythm. The boys helped water the plants every evening. Maya and I shared quiet tea breaks, and Ryan, though still busy, seemed lighter when he came home. Sometimes, I would catch him standing by the garden, watching the small shoots of green pushing through the soil. "Looks like you two made magic out here," he'd say, smiling proudly. And maybe we had. One afternoon, about a month later, Maya came home from work with a small envelope in her hand. She looked nervous but excited. "What's this?" I asked. She handed it to me with a shy smile. "Something I've been working on." Inside was a printed flyer, Community Garden Project, a space for generations. "It's an idea," she explained. A place where elders and kids can plant and grow together. I spoke to the school about it, and they're interested. I wanted to name it after you. Evelina's garden. My breath caught. After me. She nodded. Because you reminded me that growth doesn't stop, no matter how old the roots are. Tears welled in my eyes, warm and full. Oh, Maya. Before I could say anything more, she stepped forward and hugged me, the first real embrace we'd shared since the day I'd moved in. It wasn't forced or awkward. It was full and sincere, like two hearts recognizing each other again. That evening, the family gathered around the dinner table again, the scent of fresh bread, laughter, and soft conversation filling the air. Ryan raised his glass, smiling. To the women in my life, he said warmly. To my mother, who built our home with love, and to my wife, who's learning to keep it blooming. Maya blushed, and I laughed softly. Aram lifted his little cup of milk. And to Grandma's garden. The table erupted in laughter. After dinner, I stepped outside alone for a while. The moonlight touched the small garden, now dotted with young sprouts reaching upward. The air smelled faintly of jasmine, again my husband's favorite. I thought of that first whisper behind the kitchen door, the one that had pierced me so deeply. Her time here is almost over. How strange it was how words, sharp and cruel, could eventually bloom into understanding. My time here wasn't over. It had only changed shape, softened, deepened. I wasn't a guest anymore. I was a root again, part of the soil that held this family together. And somehow, through forgiveness and patience, Maya had become a branch of the same tree. Later, as I prepared for bed, Maya knocked softly and peeked in. You awake? I smiled. For you always. She walked in holding a folded blanket. I washed this for you. It smelled a bit musty. It was Farid's old shawl, the one I'd kept on my armchair. I took it, pressing it close to my chest. Thank you. She hesitated for a moment, then said, I want you to know something, Evelina. I never hated you. I was just scared. Scared of losing control, of not being enough. Her voice wavered. You made this house feel whole, and I didn't know how to share that. I stood and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. You don't have to compete with love, dear. There's enough of it for everyone. A tear slipped down her cheek. I'm glad you didn't leave. So am I whispered. She smiled, turned to leave, then paused by the door. Good night, Ma. That word Ma filled the room like sunlight breaking through morning mist. When she was gone, I sat by the window, wrapping the shawl around me. The garden shimmered faintly under the moonlight, and I felt Farid's presence in the stillness, gentle, proud, peaceful. My heart was full, because behind that same kitchen door where everything had once broken, something new had finally begun to grow. It's strange how healing sneaks up on you quietly, almost shyly, like sunlight filtering through lace curtains after a long winter. A month had passed since that night of honesty between Maya and me, and the house had found its rhythm again, a softer, slower rhythm that made room for laughter, stories, and stillness. The garden we'd planted together was thriving now. Jasmine vines climbed the fence, basil leaves shimmered in the morning dew, and marigolds stood like small suns among the green. The boys loved watering the plants every afternoon, though more water ended up on their shoes than in the soil. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch with my tea, watching Maya crouch among the flowers, her hair tied back, her face calm. It reminded me of my younger self, busy, restless, always wanting things to be perfect. I realized then that what Maya and I had both been chasing wasn't control. It was belonging. One afternoon, while I was trimming the basil leaves, Maya came outside, holding an envelope. Her expression was hesitant. Evelina, she began. I need to tell you something. I set down my scissors. Go on. She sat beside me on the bench, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of the envelope. I got a job offer. It's in another city. A really good opportunity. My heart paused mid-beat. Oh, I said, keeping my tone steady. And Ryan, he's supportive, she said quickly. It's a short-term project, maybe 6 months. I'll travel back on weekends. I studied her face, the mixture of excitement and guilt, and felt a pang that surprised me. Not jealousy, not fear. Just the quiet ache of someone who knows change is coming again. That's wonderful, Maya, I said sincerely. You've worked hard. You deserve it. She looked relieved but uncertain. But what about the house? The kids? You'll be here with Ryan, of course, but I don't want things to go back to how they were before. I smiled faintly. They won't. We've already changed too much for that. The week before she left, the house buzzed with preparation. Suitcases came down from the closet, clothes were folded neatly, and the boys clung to her legs whenever she walked past. "Mama, don't go," Isa would say, his lower lip trembling. She would kneel, kissing his forehead. "It's just for a little while, my love. Grandma and Daddy will take care of you." Ryan stayed busy helping her pack, though I could tell his heart wasn't at ease either. Every night, after everyone had gone to bed, I'd hear the soft murmur of their voices' promises, reassurances, and the unspoken fear that distance sometimes changes people. But Maya had grown. I knew that now. She wasn't running away. She was reaching forward. The night before her departure, we sat together in the living room. The boys were asleep, and Ryan was out buying some last-minute things. The only light came from a small lamp in the corner, its glow warm and steady. Maya broke the silence first. "I'm scared," she admitted, "of leaving everything I've worked for, of undoing what we just fixed." I looked at her, the woman who had once whispered that my time here was almost over, now trembling with the fear of losing the bond we'd finally built. "You're not leaving, Maya," I said gently. "You're growing, and growth never means goodbye." She smiled through teary eyes. "You always know what to say." I reached over and took her hand. "It's because I've been where you are. Every woman in a family stands there someday between love and duty, between wanting to stay and needing to go." She squeezed my hand back. "Will you look after them? Until I'm back?" I laughed softly. "You don't even need to ask." The next morning, when Ryan loaded her luggage into the car, the boys stood by the gate, waving their small hands. Maya knelt to hug them tightly. "Be good for Grandma, okay?" Aram sniffled. "Can we call you every night?" "Every single night," she promised. Then she turned to me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The morning light caught her eyes, tired, hopeful, strong. "I'll miss you," she whispered. "And I'll be here when you come back," I replied. She hugged me, long and hard, and then she was gone, the car disappearing down the street, the air carrying the faint sound of a promise too full to fade. The house felt quieter without her, but not empty. The kind of quiet that stays after a storm, the kind that lets you breathe again. Ryan and I settled into a routine. I made breakfast, he dropped the boys at school, and in the evenings, we'd water the garden together. The jasmine had begun to bloom fully now, their scent filling the air like a prayer that had finally been answered. Sometimes, Maya would call while we were all having dinner. Her voice would echo through the phone, filled with laughter and stories from her new city. The boys would fight to speak to her, Ryan would grin, and I'd listen quietly, my heart warm. She never ended a call without saying, "How's my garden doing?" And I'd always reply, "Still growing, just like you." Weeks turned into months, and the garden continued to flourish. The marigolds had doubled, the basil had spread wide, and a small sparrow had built a nest among the vines. It felt symbolic life, making a home in the space we'd once filled with silence. One evening, as I watched the sunset from the porch, Isa came running toward me, his tiny hands clutching a letter. "It's from Mama," he said proudly. I unfolded it carefully. Maya's handwriting danced across the page, graceful, steady, and full of warmth. "Evelina, I think of you every time I see a garden here. The air smells different, but somehow I still feel close to home. I've learned that roots don't just hold you down, they also help you reach higher. Thank you for being mine. With love, Maya." My eyes filled as I read it again and again. The woman who once feared my presence now wrote as though I were her foundation. And in that moment, sitting beneath a sky streaked with gold, I whispered to the air, "Her time here is far from over." Autumn arrived gently that year, brushing the garden with soft amber light and quiet winds that carried the smell of ripened soil. The marigolds burned brighter than ever, and the jasmine vines had reached the edge of the porch railing, their white flowers glowing like stars at dusk. Maya had been gone for nearly 3 months. Her absence was felt, yes, but not as emptiness. It was more like the space left behind when a song ends a silence that hums with the memory of its melody. Every evening, we spoke on video call. Her face would appear on the phone screen, tired but smiling. The boys would pile onto my lap, shouting over one another, eager to tell her about school, their garden chores, and the sparrow family that had made a nest in the jasmine vines. Grandma taught us how to tell which flowers are ready to bloom. Isa would boast, his little hands waving. Maya would laugh, that soft, tinkling laugh I'd grown to cherish. Looks like Grandma's teaching you better than your school does. Ryan, sitting beside me, would shake his head, smiling. You've turned them into little gardeners, Ma. Iregrin. Better gardeners than fighters, I think. And for a few moments, the distance between us all dissolved, replaced by warmth, laughter, and the rhythm of a family that had finally found balance. But one night, about halfway through November, I noticed something different in Maya's face during our call. Her smile was there, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her fingers fiddled with the edge of her scarf as she spoke. Is everything all right, dear? I asked softly. She hesitated. Yes. I mean, mostly. Work's just been overwhelming lately. I'll be fine. I could tell she didn't want to burden me. But I also knew that kind of silence, the silence of exhaustion, the kind that creeps in when you try too hard to be strong for everyone else. Maya, I said gently, you don't always have to be fine. She looked at me through the screen, her eyes glistening faintly. It's just, some days, I feel like I'm running and not getting anywhere. I nodded. Then stop running. Walk. Breathe. Look at something that grows. It reminds you that life takes time. She smiled weakly. You sound like the garden again. I am the garden, I teased, and she laughed, a small, real laugh that made me feel she'd be all right. A few days later, I received a small package in the mail. Inside was a photo of Maya standing in front of a little balcony garden she'd started in her apartment, a few clay pots, some herbs, a line of blooming violets. There was a note tucked behind the photo. For when I miss home. Your roots are spreading, Evelina. I held that picture for a long time, smiling through tears. It wasn't just a balcony garden. It was proof that healing grows even in unfamiliar soil. By the time December rolled in, the city had begun to shimmer with faint traces of winter soft fog, early sunsets, the smell of wood smoke in the air. The boys were excited for the holidays, their chatter filling every corner of the house. Ryan was busier than usual at work, but he always made time for our evening tea in the garden. We'd sit there, sipping quietly, watching the last of the sun melt behind the rooftops. She's changed a lot, he said one evening, looking at the jasmine vines. Maya, I mean. So have you, I said, smiling. He chuckled. I guess we all had to. I think I used to take peace for granted, thought it would just exist on its own. But it doesn't, does it? No, I said softly. Peace is something you plant. And water. Every day. He looked at me, thoughtful. You know, Ma, I used to think you were happiest when you had your old house, your own space. But I see it now. You're happiest when your love has somewhere to land. His words caught me off guard, gentle, yet deeply true. I reached for his hand and gave it a small squeeze. That's what being a mother means, Ryan. You learn to love without needing walls to hold it. That weekend, we received news that Maya would be visiting home for a few days. The boys went wild with excitement, their laughter echoing through the house as they planned how to surprise her. I spent the next day baking her favorite almond cookies and tidying the garden, wanting it to look as alive as it felt. I wanted her to truly see what we had built together. When the taxi finally pulled up outside, the sound of her heels on the walkway sent the boys sprinting toward her. Mama! They shouted, arms wide. She dropped her bag and caught them both in her arms, laughing through tears. My boys, you've grown in just 3 months. Then she looked up and saw me standing by the garden gate. For a second, we just stared, both smiling, both remembering how far we had come from that whisper behind the kitchen door. Welcome home, I said. Her voice trembled slightly as she answered. It feels like home again. That evening, the house was alive again, filled with stories from Maya's trip, the boys' chatter, Ryan's laughter, and the smell of jasmine wafting through the windows. I sat back, watching the scene unfold, my heart swelling with something close to awe. At one point, Maya turned to me and said, I saw so many faces out there, people far from their families, chasing dreams, carrying loneliness in their eyes. I think I finally understand what you meant when you said belonging isn't about where you live, it's about who remembers you. I nodded, my eyes glistening. And you remembered? She smiled. I'll never forget again. Later that night, when everyone was asleep, I stepped outside to the garden. The moon was bright, silvering the leaves and the soft petals of jasmine. I knelt by the soil, pressing my fingers into the cool earth. I told you, I whispered to the stars, imagining Farid's calm voice in the wind. Our family would find its way back. The wind rustled the vines as if in agreement, and just then, I heard the faint sound of footsteps behind me. Maya stood there in her shawl, smiling softly. Talking to the garden again, she asked. I chuckled. Always. She came closer, kneeling beside me. You know, sometimes I think this garden listens better than people. I smiled, brushing a bit of soil off my hands. That's because it doesn't judge. It only grows. We sat there together in the moonlight, two women who had learned to grow, forgive, and begin again, surrounded by the living proof of what love could rebuild. And behind the kitchen door, where once there had been a whisper of ending, there was now only the sound of laughter drifting softly through the night. The morning after Maya's return carried a sense of warmth that no season could imitate, the kind that came not from sunlight, but from peace finally finding its way home. The house seemed to hum softly again, the clinking of dishes, the laughter of children, the smell of chai steeping in the pot. For once, every sound blended in harmony instead of competition. I sat in my usual spot by the window, sewing a loose button on Ayase's shirt, when Maya walked in quietly with 2 cups of tea. She handed me one without a word, then took the seat opposite me. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was comforting, like the calm between heartbeats. Do you ever miss your old house? She asked after a while, her voice gentle, curious. I smiled faintly. Every now and then. It had my memories, my husband's laughter, my garden. But places change. What matters is whether your heart still finds a home. She nodded thoughtfully. I think I understand that now. When I was away, I realized how much this house means to me, not just as walls or rooms, but as the people inside it. Her words carried an honesty that touched me deeply. I reached over, patting her hand lightly. That's the thing about family, Maya. It's not something you own. It's something you nurture. She smiled, her eyes glistening. You've always been patient with me, even when I didn't deserve it. Maybe, I said softly, but I never stopped believing you'd find your way back. That afternoon, Ryan came home early. The boys had insisted on showing Maya their secret garden club, which turned out to be 2 small chairs, a tray of cookies, and a sign written in crayon. No grown-ups allowed unless Grandma says yes. Maya laughed so hard she had tears in her eyes. You 2 really made this. Aram puffed his chest proudly. Yes. Grandma said gardens grow better when you talk to them. Ayase added seriously. So we tell them stories. Ryan, watching from the porch, chuckled. Looks like you've started a whole movement here, Ma. I smiled at the sight of them, Maya kneeling beside the boys, her hands brushing the flowers she'd once thought were taking up space. Now, those same blooms seemed to anchor her. The air shimmered with something simple and sacred, togetherness. Later that evening, after the children had gone to bed, Maya and I sat in the garden again. The air was cool, carrying the faint sweetness of jasmine. I've been thinking, she began softly, when my project ends, I might start something new here. Oh, I asked, curious. She nodded. Something that connects families. A kind of support network for working mothers who have elderly parents or in-laws living with them. I've realized most people don't struggle because they don't love each other. They struggle because they don't know how to live with each other. Her idea made my chest swell with quiet pride. That's beautiful, Maya. And true. It's not love that fails us, it's patience. She laughed softly. You always say things like that simple, but they make sense. I shrugged playfully. Comes with age. And with many burnt rotis. That made her laugh harder, and it felt like music again, like a door creaking open to let sunlight in. The next day, we hosted a small family lunch, just neighbors and close friends. The house was filled with the sound of conversation, the aroma of food, and the warmth of shared memories. At one point, I caught Maya speaking to one of the neighbors, an older woman named Farzana, who had once pitied me when I'd first moved in. She's my mother, Maya was saying with quiet pride. Not by blood, maybe, but by heart. Farzana looked surprised. Oh, I thought you were talking about your own mother. Maya smiled, glancing my way. I am. I had to look away for a moment, blinking against the sudden blur in my eyes. That single sentence carried the weight of every prayer I'd whispered in the dark, every tear I'd swallowed in silence. And in that moment, I realized forgiveness doesn't just mend what's broken, it creates something stronger than what existed before. That evening, when the guests had gone and the house quieted down, I sat alone by the kitchen door, the same one where everything had begun. I ran my fingers along its frame, feeling the familiar grooves in the wood, the tiny scratch marks that had been there since the day we moved in. It was behind this door that I'd once overheard the words that shattered me. Her time here is almost over. I could still hear them, faintly, like an echo from another lifetime. But now, they no longer stung. They sounded like a sentence that had rewritten itself. My time here hadn't ended. It had simply transformed. I thought of all that had happened since then, the quiet battles, the shared tea, the laughter of children, the scent of blooming jasmine. I thought of Maya's transformation, her courage, her heart. And I smiled. Later, Maya found me sitting there. "You're quiet tonight," she said. "Just remembering," I replied. "This door has heard more stories than either of us know." She chuckled softly. "Then maybe it deserves a fresh coat of paint." I tilted my head, amused. "And what color would you give it?" She looked at it thoughtfully. "Something warm. Something like home." I nodded. "Then let's do it together." She smiled, stepping closer. "Tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow morning," I agreed. That night, as I lay in bed, I whispered a prayer not for myself, but for the generations that would come after. For understanding instead of judgment, for patience instead of pride, for love that learned to bend without breaking. And somewhere in the distance, I could almost hear Farid's laughter in the wind, soft and content. He would have been proud not because I had stayed, but because I had healed. The morning dawned pale and quiet, the kind of morning that feels like a clean page waiting for a story to begin again. I woke before everyone else. Old habits never fade, and moved slowly toward the kitchen, the house still wrapped in its blanket of silence. I brewed tea and watched the steam curl up from the pot. For years, this space had carried echoes of conflict, of tension, of that one whispered sentence that had changed everything. But today, it felt like a sanctuary again, calm, fragrant, alive. A soft shuffle behind me made me turn. Maya stood in the doorway, her hair tied up loosely, her smile sleepy but warm. "You're up early again," she said, rubbing her arms against the morning chill. "So are you," I replied, pouring her a cup. She took it gratefully and leaned against the counter, her eyes roaming over the kitchen. "You know," she said after a pause, "this room used to feel tight, like it was always listening." I chuckled. Maybe it was, but I think it's forgiven us now. She laughed softly. Maybe it has. Then, setting her cup down, she said, "Shall we paint the door today like we promised?" I nodded. Yes, today's the perfect day for it. After breakfast, the house buzzed with excitement. Ryan spread old newspapers on the floor while the boys eagerly unboxed the paint cans. "Blue or yellow, Grandma?" Isa asked, holding up 2 brushes. I pretended to think. "Blue for calm, yellow for warmth." "Maybe both." Maya smiled. "Let's do it your way, a mix of both. Something in between." And so we began. The scent of fresh paint filled the air as we brushed slow, even strokes across the old wooden door. With every motion, it felt as if we were erasing something, the heaviness, the distance, the hurt. Maya painted beside me, her sleeves rolled up, her laughter mixing with the boys' chatter. "I can't believe we're painting the kitchen door of all things," she said, grinning. I smiled. "It's not just a door. It's a witness. It deserves to start over, too." When we finished, we stood back to admire its soft turquoise, the color of calm seas. Light caught the wet paint, and for a moment, it looked as though the door itself was glowing. Arm clapped. "It's perfect." Maya knelt beside him. "You think so?" He nodded. "Now it's happy again." I laughed, tears threatening to escape. "Yes, my love, it's happy again." That afternoon, we all gathered in the garden for lunch, the same garden that had once been born out of silence, now bursting with life. The marigolds swayed in the wind, the jasmine vines climbed higher than ever, and the little sparrow family still flitted between branches. As we ate, the boys talked endlessly about their school, their friends, and their garden club rules. Ryan teased Maya about her city stories, and she teased him right back. It was the kind of simple, ordinary day that once felt impossible. Halfway through lunch, Maya leaned closer to me. "You know, I was thinking about how everything began." I smiled knowingly. "Behind that kitchen door?" She nodded, her expression softening. I wish I could take those words back. I reached for her hand. "You already did, Maya. You painted over them." Her eyes shimmered. "But you still remember." "Of course," I said gently. "But remembering doesn't mean resenting. It means learning." Her lips curved into a quiet smile. "Then I hope one day, when I'm old, I'll have your grace." I laughed softly. Grace is just patience mixed with a bit of stubbornness. We both laughed a sound full of light in life. That evening, as the sky deepened into violet and the first stars appeared, I stood once again by the kitchen door. The paint had dried beautifully, glowing faintly under the soft lamplight. Maya walked in, carrying a small frame in her hands. "I thought this might look nice here," she said, handing it to me. It was a simple wooden frame with a small printed quote inside. "Home isn't where you arrive. It's where you learn to stay." My heart ached sweetly at the sight of it. "It's beautiful," I whispered. She smiled. "It reminded me of you." We hung it just above the door handle, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. The kitchen hummed with the soft rhythm of the clock, the faint murmur of life beyond its walls. Finally, I broke the silence. "Do you know what I think?" "What?" "That maybe," I said, my eyes still on the quote. It wasn't just my time that was almost over that day. Maybe it was the time when this house forgot how to listen. Maya looked at me thoughtfully. "And now," I said, turning toward her. It remembers. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat in the garden with my shawl wrapped tightly around me. The moonlight washed over the flowers, and the air was cool and fragrant. I thought of Farid, of his steady hands, his patient love, and the quiet faith he'd always had in people. "You were right," I whispered to the wind. "They found their way." A jasmine petal fell onto my lap, light as a sigh. I smiled and tucked it into the pages of my old diary. The house was silent again, but it wasn't the kind of silence that hurt. It was peaceful, the kind of silence that listens, that breathes, that holds love in its stillness. I looked toward the kitchen door one last time, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The turquoise shimmered like a promise. Her time here is almost over. Those words had once meant exile. Now they meant something else, something softer, truer. My time here in this house, in their hearts, was never over. It had only just begun anew. Winter slipped in quietly, wrapping the world in soft gray light and gentle stillness. The mornings grew colder, and the steam from my cup of tea seemed to linger longer in the air, as if reluctant to fade. The garden, though slower now, still held its quiet grace. The jasmine had gone still, the marigolds nodded under the weight of dew, but the life in them remained. I often sat there on the porch, wrapped in my shawl, feeling the rhythm of a house that had finally found its heartbeat again. Inside, the walls that had once felt strained now seemed to hum with ease. The boys filled every corner with laughter and noise. Ryan spent more time at home, reading to the children at night, and Maya, she moved through the house with a gentleness I hadn't seen in her before. That whisper I'd once overheard, "Her time here is almost over," had been replaced by a far different kind of sound now. The clatter of shared breakfasts, the chatter of small hands helping to knead dough, the music of small, unremarkable moments that make a family whole. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, Maya came to sit beside me at the dining table. Her hair was tied back, and there was a certain lightness in her face, the same kind of glow I used to see in myself when peace finally caught up to me after years of chaos. "I got a message from the community center," she said. "They've approved the garden project." I blinked in surprise, smiling. "Really?" She nodded excitedly. "They said the idea was beautiful, connecting generations through growing things together. They want to start small, maybe with 10 families. My heart swelled. "That's wonderful, Maya. You must be proud." "I am," she said softly, "but I'm even more grateful. Because it was your story that started it all." I tilted my head. "My story?" She smiled. "Yes. I tell them about you. about how a whisper almost broke us, but patience and love built something better. Her words made my eyes sting, but I managed a small laugh. You'll make me cry, and then the boys will think you scolded me. She laughed too. Maybe they should hear the story one day, not the pain, but the healing part. Perhaps, I said, nodding slowly. Sometimes, what we survive becomes someone else's hope. That evening, as the first chill of dusk rolled in, we all went to the garden together. The boys wore their little wool hats, their cheeks flushed pink from the cold. They ran between the plants, laughing, while Maya and I stood side by side, watching them. They've grown so much, she said softly. So have we, I replied. She smiled, glancing at me. You know, I never thought we'd end up here. There were days I truly believed we'd never understand each other. I looked at her with gentle eyes. We don't always have to understand, Maya. Sometimes, we just have to listen long enough for love to explain itself. She exhaled slowly, her breath visible in the cool air. You always make it sound so simple. It is, I said. Simple things are just hard to do. She laughed quietly, and for a while, we simply watched the boys chase each other through the fading light. The golden hour wrapped us in its glow, painting everything in forgiveness and calm. That night, Ryan brought home a small surprise, a family photo taken by one of his colleagues, printed and framed beautifully. We gathered around the table to look at it. It showed all of us, Ryan with his arm around Maya, the boys in front, their mischievous smiles bright, and me standing behind them with my shawl, one hand resting lightly on Maya's shoulder. It's perfect, she said softly, tracing the frame with her fingers. It's more than perfect, Ryan added. It's home. I stared at the photograph for a long time. There was something profound about it, the way our faces told a story without words. The cracks, the mending, the light. The kind of picture that didn't just capture who we were, but what we'd become. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone again by the turquoise kitchen door. The moonlight touched its surface, soft and familiar. The quote Maya had framed still hung above it. Home isn't where you arrive. It's where you learn to stay. I ran my fingers over the smooth paint, remembering everything, the fear, the pain, the whispers that had once filled the space. And I whispered into the quiet. We stayed. The wind outside stirred gently, as though agreeing with me. I thought of Fard, his gentle laughter, his belief that love could weather any storm if you tended to it daily, like a garden. I imagined his voice, calm and proud, saying, You did well, Evelina. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, not from sadness, but from gratitude for every twist of fate that had brought me here, to this kitchen, to this door, to this moment of peace. The next morning, as dawn touched the windows, Maya found me still sitting there, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. You couldn't sleep? She asked softly. I smiled. I wasn't trying to. Some mornings deserve to be watched. She sat beside me. You're thinking again, aren't you? Always. She leaned her head lightly against my shoulder. Whatever it is, I hope it's a good thought. It is, I said, resting my hand over hers. It's about how sometimes the people who hurt you the most end up being the ones who love you the deepest once they learn how. She closed her eyes. Thank you for waiting for me to learn. I brushed her hair gently. Thank you for learning. The clock ticked softly in the background. The smell of breakfast began to fill the air. And there, in the calm quiet of that kitchen, the same one that had once held pain and misunderstanding, sat two women bound not just by family, but by the healing power of forgiveness. Outside, the first jasmine bloom of winter opened under the pale morning sun. Life, it seemed, was still growing. The days slipped into a gentle rhythm, each one softer than the last. Winter lingered, draping the house in quiet silver light. The mornings were filled with the clink of spoons and the boys' chatter. The evenings smelled of simmering soup and home-baked bread. The once cold walls of the house now held a warmth that came not from heaters or sunlight, but from hearts learning to live in harmony. I had come to love these still hours, the way the house sighed contentedly after dinner, the soft hush that followed once the boys were tucked in bed. It was during one of those hushed evenings that Maya came to sit with me by the fireplace. She had a notebook in her hand, the cover embossed with little golden leaves. I've been writing, she said, her voice shy but proud. I looked up, surprised. Writing? About what? She smiled faintly. About us. About what we learned. I'm calling it The Garden Door. The title alone was enough to make my heart catch. That's beautiful, I said softly. But why write it? She hesitated for a moment, then replied, because I want people to know that families can heal, that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Then write it, Maya. Tell it all, the pain, the mistakes, the forgiveness. It's in the honesty that others will find hope. She smiled, eyes glimmering with quiet determination. Would you help me? I want your voice in it too. I nodded, touched. I'd be honored. Over the next few weeks, the two of us worked on it together. Every afternoon, when the boys were at school and Ryan at work, we'd sit at the dining table with cups of tea and old memories spread between us. Sometimes she'd ask, "How did you feel that day you overheard me?" And I'd answer honestly, without bitterness, like I was standing at the edge of my own life, but also like I had one last chance to turn that edge into a bridge. She would pause to write, her eyes misty but her hand steady. Other times, she'd tell me things I never knew, how she felt trapped between wanting to please everyone and needing space to breathe. How fear, not hatred, had made her whisper those words. The more we wrote, the more the story stopped belonging just to the past. It became something else, a thread connecting generations, a map of how love survives when it's tended to, like a garden that refuses to die. One afternoon, after several pages were written, Maya looked up from her notes. "You know," she said. "It's strange. I used to think strength meant standing my ground. But now I think it's knowing when to kneel." I smiled. "You knelt in the garden the first time we planted together. That was the beginning." She nodded, her eyes warm. "I think I started healing there with my hands in the dirt beside yours." We shared a quiet laugh, the kind that comes not from humor, but from peace. Weeks turned to months, and the world outside began to shift again from winter's pale gray to the soft gold of early spring. The first buds of new jasmine appeared, delicate and brave. One morning, I woke to find Maya already in the garden, wearing a light shawl and holding a watering can. She turned when she saw me. "They're blooming again," she said with a smile. I knelt beside her, running my fingers over the tender white petals. "They always do," I whispered, "even after the coldest season." She looked at me, understanding the words beneath the words. "We did too, didn't we?" I nodded. "Yes, my dear, we did." Later that evening, the whole family gathered in the garden to celebrate the small launch of Maya's project, the Community Garden for Generations. It wasn't grand, but it was beautiful. A handful of families came, children playing, elders chatting, the air filled with laughter and blooming scents. Ryan stood beside Maya, pride shining in his eyes. "She did all this because of you, Ma," he said quietly. I smiled, shaking my head. "No, she did it because of love." I only reminded her what it looks like. When Maya spoke to the small group, her voice trembled at first, then grew steady. "This garden," she said, "started in our home with misunderstanding, with distance, with pain. But it became a place where we learned to forgive, to listen, to grow. I want others to find that peace too." The audience clapped warmly, and I felt something deep inside me lift, like the final knot in a long, tangled rope finally coming undone. That night, after the guests left and the lanterns were turned off, Maya and I stood side by side under the starlit sky. The turquoise kitchen door gleamed faintly behind us, its color soft in the moonlight. "You know," she said, "I still think about that day, sometimes the day you overheard me." "So do I admitted. "But I don't think of it as pain anymore. I think of it as the moment everything changed." She turned to me, smiling sadly. "I'll never forgive myself for it." I shook my head gently. "Don't ask for forgiveness when you've already lived it. You gave me something much better, honesty." Her eyes welled with quiet tears. "You gave me something too," she whispered. "You stayed." I smiled softly, looking up at the stars. "Love doesn't leave, Maya. It just waits until it's understood." We stood there for a long time, not saying another word. The world around us was still, but the garden beneath our feet breathed with life, roots entwined, flowers opening, leaves whispering their own stories to the night. And somewhere in that stillness, I knew our story had found its peace. The following Sunday arrived with the kind of calm that feels like a benediction. The air smelled faintly of spring, the earth still damp from dawn's dew, the birds calling softly from the garden. I stood by the window, a cup of tea warming my hands, watching sunlight creep across the turquoise door we had painted months ago. It was quiet, peaceful, complete. Maya walked in a few minutes later, her hair loose, her face bright with that gentle morning glow she had rediscovered since returning home. She leaned against the doorway, smiling. "You're always up before everyone," she teased. I smiled back. Old habits die harder than I do. She laughed softly, then crossed the room and sat beside me. "I was reading our notes last night," she said. "The story we wrote. It feels finished now." I looked at her, then out the window again. "Finished? Yes, but stories like ours don't end. They just rest." She nodded thoughtfully, her fingers tracing the edge of her teacup. "I was thinking of sending it to a magazine. Maybe someone out there needs to read it." "I think you should," I said. "If even one heart finds comfort in it, then our pain will have meant something." She looked at me for a moment, eyes soft, almost teary. "You've changed me, Evelina." "Completely." I smiled faintly. "No, my dear. You just found yourself. I only reminded you where to look." That afternoon, we all went outside. The boys were playing tag, their laughter rising like music into the wind. Ryan was trimming a branch that had grown too far over the wall, humming an old tune his father used to sing. Maya stood beside me, looking at the garden. "It's amazing how things grow when they're cared for," she said. "Ich glänze her. Even people." She turned and smiled, and for a brief, perfect moment, everything felt aligned, every scar, every silence, every whisper that had once heard now resting quietly in the soil of what we'd built together. The breeze carried the scent of jasmine again, stronger than before. The vines had climbed higher than the roof now, spilling over the edge like a gentle crown. I looked at them, then at Maya. "Do you hear that?" I asked. She tilted her head, listening. "The wind." I shook my head. "No. The house. It's breathing again." She laughed softly, but I could tell she understood. That evening, after dinner, I found myself alone for a moment by the turquoise kitchen door. I ran my hand across its smooth surface, feeling the faint texture of the wood beneath the paint. The quote above it gleamed softly in the lamplight. "Home isn't where you arrive. It's where you learn to stay." I whispered to the air, as if to the younger version of myself who once stood trembling in the same spot you stayed. "You healed. You loved again." From behind me, Maya's voice came quiet, steady, sure. "Good night, Ma." I turned, smiling. "Good night, my daughter." The door clicked softly shut, not as an ending, but as a promise kept. And in that still, sacred moment, I finally understood. When love learns to listen, no time is ever truly over.